In the heart of New York City, Ellie Hughes, a fearless black journalist known for exposing racial injustices, vanishes without a trace. As police turn their focus to her husband, suspicions mount and her family's world is torn apart. But as he races against time to clear his name, he uncovers a tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and buried truths that go deeper than anyone could have imagined. What he discovers will leave you speechless, and the truth at the end will shock you. If you're ready for a journey of mystery, resilience, and revelations that could change everything, please subscribe to our channel and join us as this story unfolds in ways you'll never expect. And let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The dawn light crept reluctantly through the narrow streets of Harlem, casting long, empty shadows across the city. Nathan Hughes clutched a mug of lukewarm coffee, his hands shaking as he stared out of the brownstone window. The familiar sounds of early morning commuters and rumbling subway cars felt distant, like he was listening to them from underwater. Something was wrong. Ellie wasn't home. He replayed the last message she'd sent him the night before. Be home late. Don't wait up. It was the kind of message she often sent on a night when she'd been working deep into her investigations. Normally, he wouldn't think much of it. Ellie was always passionate about her work, and he'd grown used to her late nights. But this was different. She wasn't just running late, she was gone. Ellie was a journalist, and a fierce one at that, known throughout New York for her powerful exposés on racial injustice and police corruption. But her recent project had consumed her in a way he hadn't seen before. She'd been secretive, slipping out at odd hours, speaking in hushed tones, her gaze filled with an intensity that both excited and unsettled him. She had confided in him once, briefly, about the weight of the story she was uncovering. "This one's close, Nate," she had whispered. "Close to home." Her words had lingered, filling him with both pride and a quiet dread. As the hours crept on, Nathan's unease grew into a gnawing anxiety. He paced the length of their living room, checking his phone every few minutes, hoping she'd text or call. When his phone finally did buzz, his heart leapt, only to sink as he saw the caller ID. Mark Riley, Ellie's editor. "Nathan." Mark's voice was tight, filled with a concern that was barely masked by professionalism. "Ellie missed her deadline last night. She's never done that before. I thought maybe she was with you, but you haven't seen her, have you?" Nathan swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "No, Mark, she hasn't come home." Mark was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Nathan felt a fear settle deep into his bones. She wouldn't just disappear, he murmured to himself, his mind racing back through the previous weeks. He recalled the nights she came home with a guarded look in her eyes, the nights she seemed burdened by something unspeakable. She had promised him she was safe, that it was just a story, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that Ellie had been in danger all along, and that she had known it. After he hung up with Mark, Nathan called the police. Within hours, the Hughes home became a hub of tense activity as detectives took notes, asked questions, and scoured the brownstone for clues. Nathan's heart pounded as he watched the officers searching their home, handling Ellie's belongings, flipping through her notes, touching the papers and photographs that had once been part of her life. It felt invasive, as if they were peering into her soul without her permission. Detective Sarah Montoya arrived later that day, her sharp gaze sweeping over Nathan as she introduced herself. She was no stranger to high-profile cases, and from her initial questions, Nathan sensed she had a personal connection to Ellie's work, a history that had informed her approach to justice. But as she questioned him, her words took on a darker edge. "How was your marriage?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his. "Any recent conflicts? Any reason Ellie might have wanted to, say, disappear for a while?" Nathan bristled. "Disappear?" he echoed, his voice hard. "She wouldn't do that. Ellie's not running from anything. She's running toward the truth." But even as he spoke, he felt a flicker of doubt. There had been moments when he wondered if she was hiding something from him, if her silence was a shield protecting her from something he couldn't understand. He pushed the thought away. Ellie loved him. They shared everything, didn't they? Days passed, and Ellie's absence became a headline, drawing intense scrutiny and whispers from both the media and their own community. Journalists dug into the Hughes' personal lives, questioning the strength of their marriage and the stability of their home. Nathan became a reluctant figure in the spotlight, his every move analyzed and his words dissected. But it wasn't the media's prying questions that haunted him. It was the hints they dropped about Ellie's secret project, the story she'd been working on so tirelessly in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. And then a discovery. The police found a journal. They presented it to him with grim faces, each officer looking at him as if he were guilty of some unspoken crime. The journal's entries were chilling. They described Ellie's fear, her anxiety, her feeling of being watched. There were hints, too, that her fear wasn't just for herself, that she was worried about someone close to her. Nathan scanned the pages in disbelief, the words blurring before his eyes. Ellie had never shared any of this with him. But as he read further, a new horror dawned on him. The journal suggested that Ellie was afraid of someone in her own home. The implication was clear. They were suggesting he might be the reason she disappeared. Nathan recoiled, a cold fury building within him. This wasn't Ellie's voice. This wasn't the woman he knew. Detective Montoya's questions grew sharper, more pointed, as if she were probing a wound to see how deep it would bleed. "Is there anything you're not telling us, Mr. Hughes?" she asked, her gaze unflinching. "Any secrets in your marriage?" Nathan clenched his fists. "No, there are no secrets," he said through gritted teeth, his voice firm. But even as he spoke, he felt the weight of the secrets Ellie had left behind. Secrets she hadn't shared with him. Secrets that now threatened to destroy everything they'd built together. In the quiet hours of the night, alone in the darkened brownstone, Nathan began to piece together what little he knew about Ellie's investigation. She had been digging into a racially charged case that had scarred her family's past. A police raid decades ago that had resulted in the wrongful imprisonment of a close family friend. It was a story that had haunted her, a story she had once told him as a cautionary tale about the cost of silence and the price of justice. Now he realized she had been trying to bring that story to light once more, but someone had wanted to keep it buried. And now Nathan feared they would go to any lengths to silence her. Nathan sat in the living room, surrounded by stacks of papers and clippings Ellie had left behind. The police had gone, the journalists had tired of waiting outside, and the house was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. He was alone now, with nothing but fragments of Ellie's life scattered around him, notes scribbled on the backs of envelopes, half-finished drafts, and hastily torn pages from old journals. It felt like she was leaving him a trail, a path to follow, if only he could piece it all together. The investigation that Ellie had poured her heart into centered around an old police raid in Harlem from the 1980s, a raid that had left her father's closest friend, Raymond Ray Williams, behind bars for life. Ellie had grown up hearing her father and Ray's family speak in hushed tones about that night. She knew the stories, the injustices that had shadowed her family and her community, but what she'd discovered in recent months had shaken her to her core. Ellie had once told him that she wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that would reach into the past and bring justice to those who had been wronged. But as Nathan looked through her research, he began to realize that this was more than a story for Ellie. This was a reckoning with her own family's trauma, a battle to redeem not only Ray's name, but her family's own legacy. He sifted through her notes, scanning for anything that could lead him to her. At first, he saw only fragments, a phone number scrawled on the corner of a page, a list of dates, names he didn't recognize. But then he came across an entry in her handwriting that stopped him cold. "They've been following me. I know they want me to stop, but I'm too close. I can't stop now." A shiver ran through him. Someone had been after her, and she'd known it. As he read, he felt the overwhelming weight of her struggle. She had been carrying this alone, not wanting to burden him, to worry him. She had walked into danger with her eyes open, all for the sake of a truth too painful to ignore. His heart ached with guilt and frustration. He had been so wrapped up in his own worries, his own career and community work, that he hadn't seen the silent war Ellie was waging. Driven by a renewed sense of purpose, Nathan decided to start with the list of names she'd written down. Many of them were familiar. Activists, local historians, older members of the community who had once marched with Ray and Ellie's father in protests against police violence. But one name stood out: Thomas Burns, a retired detective who had been part of the 1980s raid that had resulted in Ray's imprisonment. Nathan remembered Ellie speaking of him once, almost casually. Burns was part of it, she had said, anger simmering beneath her words. He was the one who led the charge. He was the one who buried the evidence. With a sense of determination, Nathan decided to visit Thomas Burns. After all, Burns was the only person still alive who could tell him what had really happened that night. He searched online and found an address in the outer boroughs where Burns had retired quietly, slipping into obscurity. That evening, he set out to visit the man. The trip was long and uncomfortable. Nathan's mind raced with questions, anger, and the simmering hope that this lead would give him answers. When he arrived, he found a modest, nondescript house, its shutters closed and its lawn overgrown. He knocked, hearing the shuffle of footsteps inside. The door opened a crack, and an older man with graying hair and wary eyes peered out. "Nathan Hughes," he introduced himself. "I'm here about Ellie Hughes, my wife." Burns's expression tightened, and he began to close the door. But Nathan caught it, holding firm. "I know you remember her," he said, his voice low. "And I know you remember Ray Williams. I need to know the truth." Burns hesitated, his face drawn and pale, before he stepped back and let Nathan inside. The house was dimly lit, cluttered with old newspapers and dusty memorabilia. As they sat down, Nathan noticed the framed badges and commendations hanging on the walls, reminders of Burns's decorated career in law enforcement. It was almost ironic, he thought bitterly, that a man who had once been celebrated for his service could have also destroyed lives so callously. "What do you want to know?" Burns asked gruffly, avoiding Nathan's gaze. "Everything," Nathan replied. "Ellie was investigating the raid that landed Ray in prison. She found something that she thought might finally bring justice. But she's missing now, and I think you know why." Burns let out a shaky sigh, his hands trembling as he rubbed his palms together. "I didn't know she'd go that far," he muttered. "I thought she'd give up, let it rest. Most people do. But your wife, she was stubborn." Nathan leaned forward, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Tell me what she found." Burns's voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid that even the walls could hear him. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. We were ordered to go in and arrest Ray, break up the whole group of agitators they called them back then. But Ray wasn't guilty. He wasn't part of what they thought. It was all fabricated. He was the scapegoat." Nathan clenched his fists. "Then why didn't you speak up? Why did you let him take the fall?" Burns looked away, shame flickering across his face. "Back then, I didn't have a choice. Orders came from higher up. Powerful people who wanted the community to stay quiet, who wanted to keep their hold on the city. I was just a pawn in their game." Nathan felt a surge of anger and disgust. Burns was confessing that Ray's life had been ruined for nothing more than political maneuvering, a desperate attempt to quash the voices rising against injustice. Ellie had been right. There was a cover-up, a buried history that people would kill to keep hidden. "What about Ellie?" Nathan demanded, his voice harsh. "Did they hurt her because she got too close?" Burns shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't know where she is. But I can tell you this, if she found out the names of the people involved, she's in danger. They won't let her go public. They'll silence anyone who tries." Nathan stood up, his resolve hardening. Ellie had risked everything to uncover this story, to bring justice to her family and community. And if she was still out there somewhere, he would find her. He wouldn't let the truth be buried again, not this time. As he left Burns's house, Nathan's mind buzzed with a new determination. He would follow Ellie's path, retrace her steps, and bring the truth to light. For Ellie, for Ray, for their community, and for the family they had dreamed of building together. A future that would be free of the shadows that had haunted them for generations. But as he walked away from Burns's house, a dark figure stood watching from the corner, blending into the shadows. Nathan didn't see them, didn't feel the eyes on him as he disappeared into the night. But someone was watching. Someone who had been following his every move. And they weren't going to let him dig any deeper without consequences. Nathan was halfway home before he noticed the car trailing him. It was subtle at first, just the same sleek black sedan that had pulled out a few blocks after he left Burns's house. But each time he turned, each time he slowed down or changed lanes, the car did the same. His heart beat faster as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing with the knowledge that he was now in the crosshairs. Pulling into a narrow side street, he switched off his headlights and waited, his hands tight on the wheel. The sedan crept past, its windows dark and impenetrable. Whoever was watching him wanted him to know he was being followed. They weren't hiding anymore. They were sending a message. But Nathan was done with fear. If Ellie had risked everything for the truth, then he would too. He waited until the car turned the corner, then sped off, determined to continue piecing together the trail Ellie had left behind. The next morning, he returned to their brownstone and began sorting through Ellie's belongings again, this time more focused, his purpose sharpened by the encounter. Her notes about Ray's case were chaotic but meticulous. Dates and names were scrawled in hurried handwriting. Newspaper clippings were marked up with red circles, and side notes filled every margin. One name appeared frequently, Marcus Graves. It was a name he didn't recognize, but as he dug deeper, it became clear that Marcus was someone with a dark past. Marcus Graves was a wealthy businessman with significant political influence in New York. During the 1980s, he had close ties with the police department and had funded various political campaigns aimed at cleaning up Harlem, campaigns that many believed had only worsened racial tensions and led to aggressive policing tactics. From Ellie's notes, it was clear that she had connected Graves to the raid that had wrongfully imprisoned Ray Williams. It was also clear that Graves had a reputation for silencing those who got too close to exposing his past. Nathan felt a chill as he realized the depth of what Ellie had been up against. She hadn't just been pursuing an old story. She had been taking on a man whose power reached deep into the city's institutions, a man with everything to lose if the truth came out. Graves was more than capable of orchestrating the kind of cover-up that had kept Ray in prison for decades. If Ellie had gotten too close, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her. Fueled by this revelation, Nathan decided he needed allies. He reached out to Reverend Martin Rhodes, a prominent community leader and family friend who had long fought for racial justice in Harlem. Martin had known Ray, had fought for his release, and had seen too many lives ruined by men like Graves. If anyone could help him make sense of what Ellie had uncovered, it was Martin. They met that evening in Martin's office at the Harlem Community Center. The walls were adorned with photos of civil rights protests, old newspaper clippings, and plaques honoring Martin's decades of service to the community. The Reverend, a tall, dignified man with salt and pepper hair and a steady gaze, greeted Nathan with a warm but solemn handshake. "I heard about Ellie's disappearance," Martin said, his voice laced with sorrow. "She was one of the bravest souls I've known. I can't believe she's gone. But something tells me you don't believe it either." Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know she's out there. I don't know where, but I know she's alive. She was onto something huge, something connected to Ray's case." Martin sighed heavily, rubbing his hands over his face. "Ray's case," he echoed, shaking his head. "We all knew the truth back then, but there was nothing we could do. We were up against forces that didn't want to hear us, didn't care about justice. They just wanted control." Nathan explained what he had learned about Marcus Graves, about his role in the raid, and his connections to the police department. Martin listened intently, his eyes darkening as he took in the information. "Graves?" Martin muttered, the name heavy on his tongue. "He was always in the background, always pulling strings. I didn't know he was still around, still lurking. But if Ellie found something that linked him to Ray's case, she was in serious danger." Nathan's stomach twisted. "I think she found something concrete, something that could finally clear Ray's name. And now I'm worried Graves knows she found it. I need to find her, Martin. I need to finish what she started." Martin nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "We'll find her, Nathan, and we'll make sure Ray's story is heard. But be careful. Men like Graves, they don't play by the rules." As they left the community center, Martin handed Nathan a worn folder filled with records from Ray's case that he had kept over the years. "It's not much," he said, "but maybe there's something in here that will help you understand what Ellie found." Back at the brownstone, Nathan pored over the folder, flipping through pages of case files, testimonies, and police reports. Most of it was familiar, the same records Ellie had shown him before, but there was one document he hadn't seen, a signed statement from a former police officer, dated just days after the raid. The statement was brief but damning, an admission that evidence had been planted in Ray's home, fabricated to ensure his conviction. The officer hadn't named names, but the implications were clear. Nathan's hands shook as he read the document. This was the kind of proof Ellie had been searching for. If she had found this, she would have known that Ray's case could be reopened, that Graves and his associates would finally be held accountable. But it also meant that she had crossed a line, that her investigation had put her directly in the path of powerful enemies. He was staring at the document, lost in thought, when he heard a knock on the door. His heart raced. He wasn't expecting anyone. Moving cautiously, he peered through the peephole and felt a surge of relief. It was Detective Montoya. "Nathan," she said as he opened the door, her expression grave. "I'm here because, well, there's something you need to know." She stepped inside, casting a wary glance down the hall before closing the door. "Your wife's case, it's being taken over by federal agents." Nathan's jaw clenched. "Why she's missing? This is a local investigation." Montoya nodded. "That's what I thought. But there's more at play here than a missing person. Someone high up wants this case buried. They're saying it's a sensitive matter, that they'll handle it. But I don't trust them. And I don't think Ellie would want the truth to be handled by people who only want it hidden." Nathan felt a flicker of hope. "So you believe me? You think she's still alive?" Montoya hesitated, then nodded. "I do. And I think you're right about Graves. But if you're going to go after him, you'll need more than evidence. You'll need people. People who are willing to risk their lives to bring down a man like that." Nathan's mind raced. He thought of Martin, of the people in Harlem who had fought for decades against injustice, who had kept the memory of Ray alive. Maybe they could do this if they worked together. Maybe they could bring Ellie home and finally expose the truth. Montoya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Nathan. Graves has eyes everywhere. If he knows you're coming for him, he won't hesitate to strike first." With that, she turned and left, leaving Nathan alone with a sense of purpose that was stronger than ever. Ellie's fight was now his fight, and he would see it through to the end. As he closed the door, he knew there was no turning back. The path he was on was dangerous, but it was the only way forward. He would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost him. Over the next few days, Nathan gathered allies. With Reverend Martin's help, they held secret meetings at the Harlem Community Center, late at night when the city's watchful eyes were less vigilant. Veterans of the civil rights movement, local activists, and families of those who had suffered under the same corrupt power structure all gathered, united by a shared history of struggle and loss. They understood that the fight wasn't just for Ray's justice or Ellie's return. It was a fight to reclaim the truth for their entire community. Detective Montoya provided Nathan with information whenever she could, slipping files to him under the radar. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Marcus Graves had orchestrated Ray's conviction and was determined to keep the truth hidden. He had influence in high places, a legacy built on the broken lives of people he had deemed insignificant. Nathan knew that if they were going to take him down, they would need undeniable, irrefutable evidence that could withstand Graves's army of lawyers and political connections. Then, late one night, they received a breakthrough. A former associate of Graves, a frail elderly man named Harold Sims, reached out to Nathan after hearing about the investigation. Harold, racked with guilt in his final days, confessed to helping cover up Ray's wrongful conviction and provided Nathan with a crucial piece of evidence, a video recording from the night of the raid, hidden all these years. In it, a younger Graves was seen directing officers to plant evidence, laughing as he watched Ray's life being torn apart. It was undeniable proof, a damning testament to Graves's crimes. With the recording in hand, Nathan, Martin, and their allies knew they were ready. But they also knew that going public would be dangerous. Graves wouldn't sit idly by as his empire crumbled. He would fight back with everything he had. Nathan could only hope that Ellie was still out there, alive, waiting for him to finish what she had started. The night they decided to release the recording to the media, Harlem's community center was packed. News reporters, activists, and members of the public all crowded in to hear the truth about Ray Williams and the Hughes family's long fight for justice. Nathan stood at the front of the room, his hands steady as he held the evidence Ellie had uncovered. The weight of the moment was palpable. As he began to speak, the room fell silent. He told them about Ellie's disappearance, about her courage and resilience. He spoke of Ray, a man who had lost his life to a lie, and the decades of suffering that had followed. And finally, he revealed the recording, playing it for everyone to see. Gasps and cries of outrage filled the room as Graves's voice echoed from the speakers. His callous disregard for human life laid bare for all to see. This was it, the truth Ellie had sacrificed everything for, the truth Ray had waited a lifetime to see revealed. But just as the recording ended, the doors burst open, and armed men in suits pushed their way into the room. They were Graves's hired thugs, a last-ditch effort to silence Nathan and everyone who bore witness to the truth. Chaos erupted as people screamed and tried to run, and Nathan found himself face-to-face with one of Graves's men, a cold-eyed enforcer who raised a gun, aiming directly at him. Nathan braced himself, but then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, Ellie, disheveled and bruised but very much alive. Ellie had burst through the back entrance with Montoya and a team of officers she had managed to rally to their cause. The moment was surreal, their eyes meeting across the room. With newfound strength, Nathan fought off his attacker, while Ellie and Montoya's team subdued the remaining thugs. Within moments, the chaos had subsided, and the thugs were handcuffed. Their attempt to silence the truth thwarted. Ellie ran to Nathan, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. They embraced, their pain and relief mingling in the silence that settled over the room. As Nathan and Ellie embraced in front of the stunned crowd at the Harlem Community Center, whispers filled the room, questions burning on everyone's lips. Where had she been? How had she survived? Ellie, though exhausted, knew this was her moment. With Nathan's steady hand in hers, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She told the audience everything, the investigation that had led her to Graves, the threats she'd ignored, and the night she was taken. She described how Graves's men had held her in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, hidden away from everyone she loved. She spoke of the days she'd spent chained and isolated as Graves's people pressured her to give up her evidence and abandon her search for truth. But Ellie's resilience had been her strength. She told them how she had eventually escaped, picking the lock on her handcuffs and slipping past her captors on a dark, stormy night. She had fled through the city, her only goal to reach Detective Montoya, the one person she trusted outside her family. When she finally arrived, Montoya didn't hesitate. She gathered her team and led Ellie to the community center, hoping to intercept Graves's men and ensure the truth came to light. As she shared her story, the crowd grew quiet, their expressions shifting from shock to admiration. They had gathered that night to hear about Ray Williams and the corruption that had stained their community. But now they were witnessing something even greater, a tale of survival, of unwavering commitment to justice, no matter the personal cost. The media, already buzzing with Graves's exposure, latched onto Ellie's story with fervor. Reporters documented every detail, transforming the Hughes family's battle for justice into a national narrative. Ellie's escape and Nathan's relentless fight became a symbol for communities across the country that had also faced injustice and corruption. In the days following the public exposure, Ellie was called to testify in court against Graves, detailing his involvement in Ray Williams's wrongful conviction and her own kidnapping. Her testimony, combined with the video evidence and her first-hand account, was a turning point. Graves was sentenced, his fall from power marked by the testimony of a woman who had once been in his crosshairs but now stood as a beacon of resilience. Across Harlem, murals of Ray, Ellie, and Nathan began to appear, painted by local artists inspired by their story. The mural in front of the Harlem Community Center became a gathering place where people shared stories, remembered Ray, and celebrated Ellie's courage. Young people came to hear the Hughes family's story, learning from their strength and resilience. Soon, the Hughes legacy was not just a story in Harlem, but a movement, a rallying cry for justice, resilience, and the power of the community. And as they walked through Harlem, Ellie and Nathan knew that their journey had touched countless lives. The Hughes family's struggle had transformed them, showing the world that when one person fights for the truth, they can change an entire community and inspire a nation. What would you do if the person you loved most suddenly vanished? How far would you go to uncover the truth? When justice is clouded by suspicion, who can you truly trust? And when the truth finally comes to light, will it bring peace or only more heartbreak? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and captivate. Thank you for watching.